Hello there, good evening. I'm just going to carry on reading through the New Yorker article. This is part 14 of it, really. It's a long haul, really, and I'm doing it this way because for some reason or other, when I take things very, very slowly, things fall into place in different ways. And also, reading this article is not just reading this article. It's carrying everything of the last 10 months, the freight and all the information of all that discussion and information, that journey with you alongside reading it and sort of comparing and contrasting it with previous points of view and how they've changed over the last 10 months with new information coming through, and the whole 10 months of considering and thinking about it and seeing how other people are thinking about things and what their viewpoints are. That's why it's taking a long time. But anyway, I just feel it's the only way I can do it. So this is where we were. The week of Lucy Letby's arrest, the police dug up her back garden. It's just absurd, and examined drains and vents. It's a pity they didn't examine the drains at Countess of Chester Hospital, isn't it? They didn't do that. They didn't do that, and they didn't look at anything to do with if it's a prospective, or if it is deemed a crime scene, they should have shut the place down basically and sealed it off and looked for all the other possibilities. We've got Hughes there pretending as though they were hoping it would be something to do with a bad bug in the water. It's just ridiculous. They did nothing in the line of that line of investigation. Nothing. They didn't feel they needed to, because they'd already chosen who it was, who was in the frame, who was guilty. They'd already chosen that. They didn't need to do that. They didn't need to look into the potential for pathogens in the unit, because the doctors weren't mentioning any of that. Of course they wouldn't. They'd keep that all secret, wouldn't they? The NHS per se would keep it all secret. They don't want to start talking about that. Did the detectives ask for all the testing that had been happening over those 2 years? The records of the testing? In terms of infection control? No. Had they done, they would have said it. They would have said it in the Operation Hummingbird video, and it would have come out in the trial. It's conspicuous by its absence. It's conspicuous by its absence, and then you get a nod towards the idea of it with Hughes saying, we were hoping for a bad bug in the water, and it's so banal and so silly and so uneducated the way he puts it. You just know they did nothing in that line whatsoever. But they wanted to give the appearance of considering anything and anybody, which is a complete bit of fakery. It's just a nonsense. It's untrue. It's just lying. I said today on Twitter, this case isn't to do with science. I mean, it would be to do with science if you were moving the idea that there's a crime out of the way. Then you need to get to the bottom of the medical negligence and the fact that there were very likely to be pathogens floating all over the place there, and look into what they were. But the idea that Lucy Letby is a serial killer and that they've proved that in any way with science is a complete nonsense. Science has proved nothing. Science has not proved anything in this case, anything whatsoever in relation to Lucy Letby's guilt, because there is no guilt. Science has done nothing, and we're in this invidious situation now in which I guess I understand it in one way, because fake science or false or fraudulent so-called science has been allowed to intrude and be the raison d'etre for why an innocent person has been sent to prison and for life. For crimes, not that somebody else did, but that crimes that didn't happen. And you're stuck in an invidious situation now of trying to marshal scientific arguments to disprove what science, quote unquote science, never proved in the first place. It's proved nothing. The thing that I keep coming back to, and it strikes me over and over again, is that there is absolutely zero evidence of Lucy Letby harming or seeking to harm any baby. It's zero. It's nothing. It's literally nothing. The only way a con like this works is Because people keep buying into the idea, well, oh, you can see how they thought there was something. No, there's nothing. There is nothing. There's as much evidence that Lucy Letby caused deliberate harm and committed crimes as there is evidence that she was an incompetent nurse. And there's no evidence of that. I keep going off onto too many segues. I'll go back to the, because I really want to get to this bit with Evans. There's a bit here that I've got to dig into in a major way, because it's changed the script a bit, for me, in my head anyway. Because it is a script. It's a script that's been created. The script is to make the murder, to make a murder out of whole cloth, out of nothing, to create the idea of crimes out of nothing. Not for nothing, because there's a reason to do it. There's the bullying aspect, but then once it gets going, the reason to do it is to cover up the awful state of that unit once the police are involved. So they've got extra reason then to spin a yarn about it all. And the police are very happy to do that. They're very happy. So they're digging up Lucy's, examining the drains, and the vents. The drains. That's what they should have been doing at the hospital. And in order to do that properly, they would have needed to say, well, we're treating this like a crime scene. Everyone's a potential suspect here that's worked here everyone, not just one person, if they're doing it seriously. And we need to look into potential other causes. Our first duty, actually, is to determine whether there is a crime at all. Not who's done it, but is there a crime at all? But they didn't do any of that. They went straight to saying, yeah, of course there's a crime. And I can't remember who it is, Jayaram or Breary said, I think it was Jayaram, said, so relieved when he realised that it took the police officer who came, not sure which one it was, which defective, came along and said, it was about 5 minutes. They sat there 5 minutes and said, yeah, we need to investigate this. Well, yeah, they should have investigated. It's been reported to them. They should investigate it. But what should they investigate? Initially, is there a crime at all? Is there a crime? Not who's done the crime. Not who's done the crime and have it all handed to them on the plate. And they acknowledge in the Hummingbird video that they don't know anything about the medical world, and why should they? So it's all handed to them by the Gang of Four, and then by Evans, and then they just go along just doing it, and worse though, and much worse they do, which is coming later in this article here. So they're examining I've only got past the first bloody line. They're examining the 8 minutes, the drains and the vents, presumably to see if she'd hidden anything incriminating. Like what? Like what? Yeah, that's the thing. She's got the so-called confession note, which is a billion miles away from any kind of confession note, on open display. And yet they're digging up the garden looking for something she's hidden. It's all just, none of it makes sense. None of it is ever going to make sense. They did all this because they could. They did it all because they could. 4 months later, while she remained out on bail without charges, the Chester Standard wrote, that's the local paper for Chester, who did some good reporting, just sort of factual reporting of the trial. This situation has caused, this is a quote from the Standard, Chester Standard, the situation has caused many people to question both the ethics and the legality of keeping someone linked to such serious allegations when seemingly there is not enough evidence to bring charges. And that's right. See, there is a conscience in some journalists, and they can see it. They can see it's wrong. Anyway, that's the end of that quote. Lucy Letby was arrested a second time in 2019, so a year later. But after being interviewed for another 9 hours, she was released. They still haven't got enough. They still haven't worked it up enough. They still haven't fabricated it enough. They still haven't pushed away enough of the exculpatory evidence or the fact there's no motive, and they're still working on it. They need another year. It's despicable. It's despicable what they're doing. It takes a while to frame somebody at this level. That's why they took a couple of years to do it. It takes a while to frame somebody at this level. for this number of crimes, and they took their time, and then they framed her. They framed her. But in a sense, they took on the baton that had been handed to them by those 4 consultants, and which was further ratified by this, what do you call him? Fraud. I don't know what he is. Sort of a criminal, actually. I think he's a moral criminal. Evans. A moral criminal. In November 2020, more than 2 years after Lucy Letby's first arrest, an officer called Gilby, that means she rang, I misunderstood this when I first read it, an officer from the Hummingbird nonsense, rang Gilby, Susan Gilby, the new CEO, taken over from Chambers, Tony Chambers, to inform her that Lucy Letby was being charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder. Later, one of the murder counts was dropped. That was the murder of baby Kay, for which there's been a retrial recently, for which Lucy Letby was found guilty of attempted murder, but they dropped that at the last minute. The murder of baby Kay. Well, there wasn't a murder of baby Kay, but the baby Kay died in a different hospital 3 days after, in a tertiary level 3 unit, 3 days after leaving or being taken from Countess of Chester Hospital, where she'd received abysmal care, and that's why this poor baby died. Later, one of the murder counts was dropped, and 5 attempted murder charges were added. So they're just, they'll drop one and they'll just add a bunch more. They're just throwing everything at it to overwhelm the jury, overwhelm them. Jury's sitting there thinking, nobody would be accused with this number of murders if it wasn't true. Unfortunately, that's what the defence have got to then have, that huge mountain to knock down, effectively, of that presumption. Well, nobody would be here if they weren't guilty. Okay, one murder with all the police, and they've been doing it for years, and the CPS and all these people looking into it, a whole team has spent like 10, 15 million quid, whatever, it may be more. I mean, they might have got one murder wrong, and maybe it's someone else or something else, but not 14. And here's another thing is, well, if this isn't the serial killer, in quotes, well, who is then? Don't tell me there's 2 of them. Don't tell me there's another serial killer there, and they can't have got the wrong person. And then they bring out the sheet with all the X's down it, which means nothing at all, because of how the deaths have cherry-picked. And the Royal Statistical Society have been writing about that recently as well. They put out an article or a response about it. The RSS, Royal Statistical Society. So they've added these things. She was arrested again, and this time she was denied bail. She would await trial in prison. As a courtesy, Gilby, that's chief executive of Countess of Chester Hospital, called Chambers to let him know. She was taken aback when Chambers expressed concern for Lucy Letby, because he knows, whereas Gilby is one of these sort of like a cardboard cutout individual that's just swallowed it all and gone for it and wants to be seen to be sticking up for her doctor friends, really. Whereas Chambers trained as a nurse, and he knows the score. He knows how nurses can be targeted, for all kinds of, and bullied by people like this. And he's right. He was right then, he's right now. Chambers expressed concern for Lucy Letby. She said that he told her, "I'm just worried about a wrongful conviction." Sounds like a good guy, Tony Chambers. I mean, they, as a corporate decision, they shouldn't have taken Lucy Letby off that unit. Maybe in hindsight, in some way, they thought they were trying to protect her because they knew that she was being bullied. And then when Lucy Letby brought the grievance, it was formally acknowledged that she'd been bullied by these people. But then they bring the police in, and then they go after Tony Chambers, you see, so he's forced out. I think he did it within his scope. I think he did the best he could, and he's saying it after the charges have been brought. He's worried about a wrongful conviction, because he knows he's somebody with intuition, and he would have known Lucy Letby as well. and would have known what happened throughout the grievance process and what that was about. And he would have known the way some consultants behave and how these particular ones did behave. In September 2022, a month before Lucy Letby's trial began, the Royal Statistical Society published a report titled, quote, "Healthcare Serial Killer or Coincidence?" Close quote. The report had been prompted in part by concerns about two recent cases, one in Italy and one in the Netherlands, in which nurses had been wrongly convicted of murder, largely because of a striking association between their shift patterns and the deaths on their wards. The Society sent the report to both the Lucy Letby prosecution and the defence team. It detailed the dangers of drawing causal conclusions from improbable clusters of events. In the trial of the Dutch nurse Lucia de Burke, a criminologist had calculated that there was 1 in 342 million chance, that's right, that the deaths were coincidental. Sounds like another Meadows calculation, the Meadows guy with the other expert that got it wrong and destroyed people's lives and got women put in prison for life, who then were freed on appeal with ridiculous calculations like this, which are completely wrong. But his methodology, whoever the knob was, was faulty. When statisticians looked at the data, they found that the chances were closer to 1 in 50. Oh, he's only slightly out then. Just slightly out. What did he say? For Lucia de Burke, 1 in 342 million, but it was only 1 in 50 in the actuality. Oh, give him a break. He's only slightly out. They'll probably still be using him on other cases, in other court cases. That original expert probably still using him on other ones. He'll probably round it down to just 200 million chance next time, just to say, oh well, then they won't look into it. Then I'll keep getting away with this crap. I'll keep getting away with it. 1 in 50. According to Ton Dirksen, a Dutch philosopher of science who wrote a book about the case, the belief that, quote, such a coincidence cannot be a coincidence. The belief that such a coincidence cannot be a coincidence, close quote, became the driving force in the process of collecting evidence against Lucia de Burke. She was exonerated in 2010, so she spent, I think, about 5 years in prison. Is that right, 5 years? It was several years anyway. And Richard Gill, the mathematician and statistician and scientist was involved in both these cases, and he's done a huge amount in terms of Lucy Letby case, and ongoing, and is continuing that. And you'll find him on X or Twitter under @Gill1109. That's Richard Gill. He's based in Holland, and he was absolutely instrumental and decisive in getting Lucia de Burke freed on appeal, and also the Italian nurse. I can't remember the Italian nurse's name. Daniela Poggiali. Daniela Poggiali. Yeah, So he's been incredibly diligent in the Lucy Letby case, and again he tried to contact the defence and the judge in the trial last year, and then was threatened by the Cheshire Police. Threatened for potential perverting the course of justice or something of that sort, or contempt. Sorry, not perverting the course of justice. I take that back. It's just from memory now. It threatened with contempt of court, as was Sarita Adams in America. They sent her a letter as well, just because they wanted to send this information, vital information, to the court for the judge to consider and the defence and prosecution to have sight of. So that's how they deal with it. That's how they shut people down. It's getting a bit dark now. I'm just going to turn the light on a bit. Here we are. Yeah, so she was exonerated in 2010. That's Lucia de Burke. And her case is now considered one of the worst miscarriages of justice in Dutch history, as Lucy Letby's will be. and hopefully it will be as soon as possible that they can do that. They've got to be forced to act very, very quickly now. Got to be forced to act. Makes you feel like you'd want to. There's a group of people there to break Lucy out and take her home, and then just get these bastards to act properly. They just take their time. No skin off their nose, is it? The CCRC and all these twits in the criminal justice system going, we shall have another look at it, maybe in another 5 years. I'm sick of it. Anyway, I've got to stop going off on rants. The Italian nurse Daniela Poggiali was exonerated in 2021 after statisticians, so that's Richard Gilligan, and reanalysed her hospital's mortality data and discovered several confounding factors that had been overlooked. Oh yeah, there's definitely confounding factors that have been overlooked in Lucy Letby's case. Factors that push her away from the idea that she's committed any crimes at all, as obviously happened in the Daniela's case and in Lucia de Burgh's. William C. Thompson, one of the authors of the Royal Statistical Society report and an emeritus professor of criminology, law and psychology at the University of California, Irvine, told me that medical-murder cases are particularly prone to errors in statistical reasoning because they, quote, involve a choice between alternative theories, both of which are rather extraordinary. He said, quote, one theory is that there was an unlikely coincidence, and the other theory is that someone like Lucy Letby, who was previously a fine and upstanding member of the community, suddenly decides she's going to start killing people. Flawed statistical reasoning was at the heart of one of the most notorious wrongful... Oh, here we are. We're getting into it now. Statistical reasoning was at the heart of one of the most notorious wrongful convictions in the UK. A lawyer named Sally Clark was found guilty of murder in 1999 after her two sons, both babies, died suddenly and without clear explanation. One of the prosecution's main experts, a paediatrician. I've just got to stop for a minute. I'm just going to check that guy's name. I'm sure because there are two really dodgy ones in similar cases. I'm back. I was right in the one I was thinking. So I just wanted to make sure I remembered it was the right one, because there's been terrible so-called experts that have destroyed people's lives over the years. Flawed statistical reasoning was at the heart of one of the most notorious wrongful convictions in the UK. She was a lawyer named Sally Clark, was found guilty of murder in 1999 after her two sons, both babies, died suddenly and without clear explanation. One of the prosecution's main experts, a paediatrician, now this is Sir Roy Meadow, an infamous character, Sir Roy Meadow, who created this piece of crap called Meadow's Law, which ended up destroying Sally Clark's life and effectively murdered her. His Meadow's Law. Complete load of bollocks. One of the prosecution's main experts, a paediatrician, Sir Roy Meadow, it doesn't say that in here, but I know that's who it is, argued that the chances of two sudden infant deaths in one family were 1 in 73 million. But his calculations were misleading. He treated the two deaths as independent events, ignoring the possibility that the same genetic or environmental factors had affected both boys. I mean, I think it stops about that. What happened to Sally Clark was she was freed on appeal when they realised that this Sir Roy Meadows' theories and his calculations were absolute rubbish. Dangerous rubbish, as much as Evans's are. So they've not learnt anything. They're still getting these absolute arseholes in. Absolute idiots in. But poor Sally Clark, she's so destroyed. She's so destroyed by what had been done to her after being released from prison, and she'd been in there for a number of years. She was so destroyed as a person. She barely lived I think it was less than a year. It destroyed her. So that's why I say that it effectively murdered her, what this idiot, what the criminal justice system so-called, and this bloody arsehole Meadow did. In his book, this is back to the article of Rachel Aviv, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, 2011, Daniel Kahneman, a winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, argues that people do not have good intuitions when it comes to basic principles of statistics. Quote, we easily think associatively, we think metaphorically, we think causally, but statistics requires thinking about many things at once, close quote, a task that is not spontaneous or innate, as Rachel goes on to elaborate. We tend to assume that irregular things happen because someone intentionally caused them. Open quote. Back to the whole witch finding days, isn't it? You know, the pig died. It's the pig was looking all right, now it's died, but somebody was walking up the lane. That woman from the lane that lives alone looked at the pig in the wrong tone of voice, and the pig died. We haven't moved on from that. In many ways, we've not moved on from it. That's the vibe, that's the energy working through those so-called doctors, consultants. Same vibe, same energy. That's just gone on and on and on and built up, and that everyone's piled in on it. Same energy. Quote, our predilection for causal thinking exposes us to serious mistakes in evaluating the randomness of truly random events, he writes. Then it goes on to another bit here. Burkhard Schaefer, a law professor at the University of Edinburgh who studies the intersection of law and science, said that it appeared that if the Lucy Letby prosecution had, quote, this is a good bit, I remember putting a tweet about this, quote, it appeared as though the Lucy Letby prosecution had, quote, learned the wrong lessons from previous miscarriages of justice, i.e. they've replicated them. Instead of avoiding the miscarriage of justice, that they've replicated them. They've replicated them. Yeah. Back to Rachel Aviv. Instead of making sure that its statistical figures were accurate, the prosecution seems to have ignored statistics. A quote again from, I think this Schaefer chap, the law professor. Looking for a responsible human, this is what the police are good at. Well, I'm not so sure about that. But he seems to be. I mean, in some instances, yes. In some instances, it's a mixed bag. Yes, sometimes, and other times, no. Schaefer told me, what is not in the police's remit is finding a systemic problem in an organisation like the National Health Service after decades of underfunding, where you have overworked people cutting little corners with very vulnerable babies. I'll read that again, I made a mess of that. So Schaefer's saying, what is not in the police's remit is finding a systemic problem in an organisation like the National Health Service after decades of underfunding, where you have overworked people cutting little corners, or big ones, I've added that bit, with very vulnerable babies who are already in a risk category. It is much more satisfying. That's an odd phrase there. I didn't like that when I read that. It is much more satisfying to say there was a bad person, there was a criminal, than to deal with the outcome of government policy. I just don't understand why it's satisfying. It just strikes me as an odd way to put it. Convenient or, expeditious, or a way of covering up something, but satisfying doesn't seem right there, but that's me picking at it. Next paragraph. Schaefer said, this law professor, that he became concerned about the case when he saw the diagram of suspicious events with a line of X's under Lucy Letby's name. I need more light. More light. It's getting dark. So he's become suspicious, yeah, with this, the chart that they showed in court, with all the X's down the name, because the cherry-picked deaths and crashes out of a subset, out of a huge, bigger set. We'll come to that later. About it's just blown it apart for me about what they've done because of the new information in here. He thought, that's Schaefer, that it should have spanned a longer period of time. Well, you don't say. And included all the deaths on the unit, not just the ones in the indictment. You don't say. Well, really, you'd think that the defence should have prepared such an alternative, literally prepared such an alternative diagram or chart, shouldn't they? Should have prepared one. I think a big aspect of this is, and it's come up many times over the last 10 months, 11 months, is that this concept of Myers, the KC, the barrister for Lucy Letby, fighting with one hand tied behind his back, or maybe even one hand and three fingers of the other hand. And what is meant by that is he was trying to defend Lucy while at the same time not attack the NHS or not be seen to be attacking the NHS in any way whatsoever. And I don't think you can do that. You don't think you can do that, or he's having to be so careful. And then there's an extra element there of all the NHS lawyers swarming around this case, deciding on what evidence and fighting for what evidence that the defence mustn't be allowed to look at for their reasons, for the NHS's reasons, to protect the NHS. Sacrifice Lucy for the NHS. Now that's what the game then becomes once those NHS lawyers get involved. Just to reiterate, I think I said in another video, we've got this situation where his name escapes me at the moment. One of the head of legal for Countess of Chester Hospital used to be a police officer and then also worked in a legal capacity for Cheshire Police before. So it's so incestuous, that world. Once they've decided Lucy Letby, as that Gilby chief executive said, well, don't you know what she's done? And she was saying that in 2018. Once they've decided that, then the NHS as a corporate body is going for her. Then they certainly don't want to have a defence barrister start going for the NHS, and then Myers has sort of agreed and done this not very good defence of Lucy Letby because he's not been able to attack all the positions that are being, for fear of being seen to attack the NHS. But this whole case is about the NHS. It's about the failure of this trust and that's operating in dangerous circumstances and nobody doing anything about it. With as per the Alison Timmis email, back in 2015, it's dangerous. Children are going to die. It's not safe. Nobody's listening to us. Which I don't think came up at the trial. I don't believe. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm losing my track. He said it should have been a longer time period, included all the deaths on the units, not just the ones in the indictment. It should have also included a lot of other things, but I'll come to that later. Should have included all the so-called crashes and also a notion of what designates a crash, what the criteria that means a crash is a crash as opposed to something that isn't. It's about really identifying what these terms mean and what they're made to mean within the court setting and in the prosecution's case. What do they actually mean? The diagram, according to Schaefer, appeared to be a product of the, quote, Texas sharpshooter fallacy, close quote, a common mistake in statistical reasoning which occurs when researchers have access to a large amount of data but focus on a smaller subset that fits a hypothesis. So the term comes from the fable of a marksman who fires a gun multiple times at the side of a barn. Then he draws a bullseye around the cluster where the most bullets landed. to give the impression that he meant to do that. And that's it's a distortion, isn't it? Which is obviously what they've done. But that's not all what they've done. That's only just the top level of what they've done in terms of how the construction of this framing has occurred. It's only one element of what they've done. It's one way of presenting the framing, but there's so much more. I'm not sure when to stop here because it's getting into the I'm going to stop before I'd hope to go on to this bit about Evans when Evans comes in here, but I'm going to stop because it's getting too long. I'll just do this last paragraph because this next bit about Evans I'll do in the next video. It just raises so many more questions, and I just don't think you haven't got the scope in the article that Rachel Aviv has written here to probably tease out all the potential meanings of the evidence that she's uncovering here, which wasn't common knowledge before. Well, it wasn't knowledge to me, and I don't remember anyone else talking about it in the period from August, September last year up until this article came out, and up until which is further reiterated, what's going to come is further reiterated in the Court of Appeal's decision for why they turned down Lucy Letby's application for appeal, or for leave to appeal. So the last paragraph I'll do, then I'll just finish for tonight. For one baby, the diagram with all the X's, the chart that they showed in court, showed Lucy Letby working a night shift, but this was an error. She was working day shifts at the time, so there should not have been an X by her name. At trial, the prosecution argued that though the baby had deteriorated overnight, the suspicious episode actually began 3 minutes after Lucy Letby arrived for her day shift. So they just move the goalposts. Move the goalposts. Move the goalposts. Nonetheless, the inaccurate diagram continued to be published even by Cheshire Police, even by the Cheshire Police. Well, I don't know why you need to even put even by there. I put especially by them. Especially by them, because it's their bollocks, isn't it? And they're proud of it. Oh, they're proud of it. They're proud of that chart. They put all their brains together to create it. All their sneaky, slimy, underhand, framing, deceitful minds together to create it. But it was the end of a process, and that's what we're going to get into next time. When we're going to start talking about looking at the section in this article about Dowie Evans, or Dewey Evans, and the so-called cases that he received, and what he did with them, and the decisions he made, and how he came to those decisions, and who might have helped him, and who might have guided him. But anyway, that's for next time. Thanks for listening, if you have, and take care. Bye-bye.